Welcome back, everybody, to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here with Joseph Wagner, and today we are going to talk about a very fascinating subject that I think there's a lot to flesh out here. So, us being the Denver Dzogchen podcast, we need to talk about Dzogchen once in a while. Of course, we're going to have to talk around this in some ways because we can't talk about everything. You need to be a practitioner and have received these instructions. But just in a general way, one of the big questions people have is how to relate to Dzogchen in connection to Vajrayana, Mahayana, and Hinayana, the rest of the path, right? Because there are some teachers out there who basically teach Dzogchen as almost its own thing, right? Almost like its own tradition, its own religion. It has no other connections or only a provisional connection to the previous Buddha Dharma prior to that. But then there's others like my lamas, et cetera, who see it all as one thing, right? That nine yanas in the Nyingma school, that Dzogchen being, the ground of all of it, but also the pinnacle of it, and connected deeply to Vajrayana. So I'm hoping, Joe, today you could talk to us a little bit about why we practice Dzogchen in the context of all of the other parts of the path, and why that's a good idea, and why maybe those support each other, and why there might be some problems with trying to practice Dzogchen in a way disconnected from everything else.
Hi, Damien. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me back. Again, with these very profound topics, I want to say I'm not an expert. I'm here giving my opinion, which is based on a lot of practice, but not a lot of practice compared to real practitioners, like people who spent many years in caves and so forth. So I'm interpreting these things and these ideas based on being a Westerner, right? Guy went to college in Ohio. I'm a regular guy, right? But I have been lucky enough to receive a lot of teachings, and so I can share what my experience of this is, and how I do it, and then people can use that themselves to figure out their own path. Uh, we are all our own master in a sense. I think that's really important. Even if, of course, you need a teacher and you need to see the teacher as the Buddha. That's the very essence of the Vajrayana. But who's deciding whether that's your teacher or not? You are. So ultimately, you are self-responsible. And I offer this to everyone with that in that context. I don't want to say like, I got the answer. If I had the answer, I'm sure our podcast would have more listeners. Do not have the answer. But this is what my understanding is. Most of my Vajrayana instruction that I've received has been in Asia. And although I did get quite a bit of teaching from Tulku Urgyen and his sons and many lamas in Nepal and so forth, the great bulk of the teachings I've received are received in Tibet itself from teachers who have never been to the West and have no connection to Westerners besides myself and a few of my friends. And I have to base my understanding of these kinds of things on what they do and tell me, not on something else. So I don't know if there's really a straight out answer about this. But it is a point of, I wouldn't say confusion, but there's a few different viewpoints out there, it seems. And it's popular these days in some Western-based sanghas, and also Tibetan, like Namkhai Norbu, seem to have some of this view that Dzogchen is its own thing. It has nothing to do with Buddhism. It's not even a Buddhist path. It's its own thing. And I suppose that, they have their reasons for presenting it that way, and I wish them luck. That is not my experience of how the great masters of our time engage with Dzogchen. If you're a Nyingma practitioner, then you do see the path as 9 yanas, with the beginning yana, the Shravaka yana, what we call Theravada or Hinayana, not the best word for it. And these are, the recorded words of the Buddha, the earliest recording we have, not filtered through later developments of Mahayana and so forth in India. And they act as the foundation for the rest of the path. And then as you ascend into the Tantras, they become progressively more interiorized. And then the 3 highest Tantras everybody knows about, Maha Yoga, Anu Yoga, Ati Yoga being a synonym for Dzogchen. So in that context, my teachers have told me, and I have sprung in on them at times when they were not expecting it to see what they were actually doing. And I have yet to meet with lamas who spend their entire time just staring into space and meditating. That they may do that when they're in retreat, but my experience of them is that they are always practicing what I myself would call Vajrayana practices, or specifically Maha Yoga practices, which are Yidam related practices of reciting mantras and so forth, generating oneself as the deity. Uh, every time I met Tulku Urgyen, including the very first time, which I detailed in other podcasts that are easy to find, when I came in unexpectedly to see Rinpoche, what was he doing? He was saying mantras. He was not sitting in the Togal postures. He was not, performing Rushen. I'm not saying he didn't do those things. Of course, I'm sure he did quite a pile of those, but he was saying mantras. He says in his own brief biographies in different places that he spent his first 3 retreat just saying the Mani mantra. Now, this is a Lama whose family was 100% Dzogchen. His father was a great Dzogchen master. His uncles were great Dzogchen masters. His root guru, who was also his uncle, Samten Gyatso, was considered the greatest Dzogchen master of his time in that area of Kham, in the Nangchen area. And I have a very strong sense from what Tulku Urgyen told me and the stories that he told that they did the same thing that Tulku Urgyen himself did, which is to continuously be reciting mantras and to continuously be generating oneself as the Yidam. And in the middle of those practices, what are they doing? They're recognizing their own nature, of course, right? Because that's the final end of the path. When we look at it in a Nyingma way, Dzogchen is the pinnacle of the path, right? And for our listeners who are not 100% familiar, Dzogchen has 3 aspects. It has the preliminary nundro of Dzogchen, which is called Rushen, to separate samsara and nirvana, which is a series of exercises that most people know something about, of saying certain things, standing in a certain way, visualizing certain things that causes a practitioner to have a deeper and deeper understanding of the difference between ordinary mind, the confused ordinary mind of Sem, and the pristine awareness of Rigpa or the Sugadagarbha. Those practices lead to greater separation of the ordinary mind from the primordial mind, so to speak, to just a general sense. And then what is taught as Dzogchen meditation these days is what's called Trekcho, to cut through conceptuality or solidity and to recognize one's own nature and allow that recognition to be perpetuated in a natural way, to gain familiarity. Gom is the meaning of meditation in Tibetan, Gom, Gom, to become familiar with what is primordial to us, what is our absolute nature, the Buddha nature, so to speak. And that is what is now taught these days as Dzogchen meditation. If you go to a Dzogchen retreat, what are they talking about? How to recognize your nature, how to allow it, how to liberate confusion, and so forth. And then there's one other part of it, which is called Togal, which means to immediately cross, or direct crossing, transcendent crossing, sometimes translated as these kind of things. This is a visionary practice having to do with recognizing one's nature and allowing a spontaneous light visions to appear and then process the bardo in this life. So you don't have to go through the bardo. You can attain enlightenment in the first bardo of Dharma talk. So that's what Dzogchen is, so to speak. Of course, there's a huge amount of philosophy around it, and the 7 Treasuries by Longchenpa, and the Nintik Yabshi collections, and infinite termas, and a million other things. But everything really boils down to those 3 practices, of which there are sub-practices in all of them. So this is just a general overview for people who aren't, might be just somebody sent them this video and they're like, what are you talking about? Now you have a general sense. And that's what's called Ati Yoga in the scheme of the 9 yanas, the top 3 being Maha, Anu, and Ati. Basic focus of Maha Yoga is visualizing oneself as a deity, reciting the speech of the deity, which is the mantra, and having the mind rest in samadhi. And that's an infinite, humongous amount of information with thousands of different deities and all sorts of different things. Anu Yoga is more on the internal yogic application of these methods, deals with the three aspects of the subtle body, the nadis, the channels, the prana, the energy or like chi that flows through those channels, and then the subtle essences of mind and of sexual essence and so forth called bindu. And moving those bindus around inside these channels and can bring about a great deal of bliss in the body and mind and a dissolving in a very inescapable way of dualistic notions. And it can be a direct introduction to the nature of one's own mind. So these three highest yogas, in my experience of receiving teachings and doing practices in this tradition for, not a super long time, but 30 years or something, the great masters I know, they seem to combine these. They do not seem to just say like, Ana Yoga is ridiculous and Maha Yoga, who would ever say mantras? That's stupid. We just only like meditate non-conceptually at all times. That is not my experience of what's going on with the masters. So
Yeah.
that's what you asked, but it's a little beginning.
Yeah. Well, like when I first encountered Buddhism about 20 years ago, I read the first book I picked up just randomly in a used bookstore was Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness, the Dzogchen text by Padmasambhava. And even reading it, I had these glimpses of what they were talking about. And I could see how you could feel, and even some of the words seem to indicate this is it. You don't need anything else. You've had this moment of presence, and everything else seems kind of silly in some ways. But in my own experience, and although I can see that, I can see how you could take it that way. I had these very, very, very brief moments of those glimpses. And even if I was to like try to do that all day, it would still be minuscule amount of time where I was actually having those glimpses. So what it basically amounted to is I had a glimpse, but then I was completely ordinary the rest of my life and without changing anything, no karma improvement, still causing all kinds of problems, the same shithead I was before. And so, so then I met a teacher, took refuge, did Nundro, all of that. And there's been some improvement on my karmic conditioning through these practices. So I myself have I can see the temptation to see that kind of experience as being like, and this is taken, there's secular people even in the modern culture these days who aren't affiliated with Buddhism, who've come across these teachings and see the truth of them or have some taste of it or some experience of it. But it just amounts to an intellectual notion is what I see. That is that even if though they have some genuine glimpses of it, it mostly becomes an intellectual notion that you can then use to get away with whatever behavior you want, not improve yourself whatsoever, and really doesn't look much like a path to me. And so I think that I'm curious your thoughts on this, because as I said, I can see what they're saying. When you read some of the Dzogchen texts, they seem to be saying, this is it. There isn't anything else, and everything else is a trap of some sort. But also, we have this whole tradition that holds, there's more to do, it seems, than just recognize this thing. That's not is necessary, but not sufficient for total transformation.
I understand just what you're saying. I myself do not know. Maybe it is possible to take just the Trekcho view only and practice only that and attain great levels of accomplishment. It seems like, okay, it does make sense. And it is what the texts say. I think it's important, and this is just my opinion. I think it's important to realize that all traditions, especially in Tibet, they were competing with each other, right? The Nyingma school is competing with the Kagyu school. And in the Kagyu school, there are 25 sub schools, right? And there was a lot of political and everything was very mixed together. The Dharma was mixed with politics, was mixed with power. And whenever that happens, it's hard to know how much of what is being said is the actual truth of, straight talk and how much of it is a kind of like Dzogchen salesmanship. I mean, this is where they say, like, we have the highest view. And hey, if you only do this, I mean, think about the interaction between Milarepa and his Nyingma teacher before he met Marpa, right? He went there. He had, obviously, you got to think, Milarepa was not an ordinary person. He was already able to perform black magic that worked. I mean, I don't think that's very common. It wasn't common then, and it's not common now, right? It's not like you just learn some mantra and then the house falls on your extended family. It's not like that. You know, he was already special. He met this Nyingma teacher whose name I cannot remember, and that teacher said, "My dharma is so powerful that if you practice in the morning, you become a Buddha in the morning. You practice at night, you become a Buddha at night." And he gave Milarepa, we assume he gave him the pointing out instructions that we all received from our teachers about what the nature of mind is. And Milarepa, whether I remember Gongten Rinpoche saying, Milarepa, he was kind of dumb. He didn't get it. I get that. And this is just Tibetan humor, I guess. Milarepa spent all his time just sleeping. He's like, this is fantastic. They were feeding him. You know, Tibet's a rough place. I imagine it was extra rough in the 11th century. And he was being fed and he just laid around. And the master said, go ahead, do this for 3, 4, 5 days, and I will return and we'll see what your experience is like. Milarepa just spent the time sleeping, right? And at the end of that time, the master was like, this isn't the path for you. So in light of that, he sent him on to Marpa, and Milarepa entered into a period of a lot more hard work. But it did lead him to be Tibet's greatest yogi, right? Excuse me. I suppose that it is possible to only practice the Dzogchen teachings. I myself, Tulku Urgyen, one of the last times I saw him, he said, are you picking up what I'm putting down? You know, are you getting what I'm saying here? And I was like, yeah, I think so. And then we had a little back and forth. I'm following you. And he said, just do that. Whatever else you do, do that. And this could be taken as a teaching like, you don't need to do Yidam practice. You don't need to do the Rushen. You don't need to do even the Nundra. All you need to do is recognize your nature and stay in that. I suppose from one perspective, that could be true. But it's awfully hard to do. And it's very iffy if that's going to really lead to the kind of accomplishment that we want and the sort of freedom from samsara that we're shooting for and the ability to benefit beings the way that we've vowed to do and that we want to do as practitioners. I will share, I once asked an incredible great yogi in Tibet almost this exact same question. Is it enough to just recognize the view? Are we good if we do that? The Lama's name is Lama Chöying Dorje Lama Norsok. He's, to my mind, the most Mahasiddha-like being I've ever met. There are real, literal miracles going on around him seemingly all the time in a way that I've never seen around any other Lama. And I think that has to do with the ground of Tibet being special. And he was extraordinary and spent 50 years living in a cave, which we went to a few times and even visited him in that cave. And he was an extraordinary person. And his answer to that question was not what you'd expect. I kind of thought he'd be like, yes, just stay in the view. You done all this other stuff is for people of lesser capacity or not necessary. He said, well, people come to me all the time asking that question and saying, well, hey, I've recognized the nature of mind. Is this enough? Like, I got it. I don't need to do this other stuff like nungye and fasting and prostrations. I'm like, why would I do that? I got the essence. And he said, this is not my experience. This is Lama Norsok speaking. He said, this is not my experience. If you do not practice the Yidam, if you do not accomplish Yidam, your own personal deity, there's no place for the blessings to land. This is a direct quote. I mean, translated into English, and I have thought about that since he told me that, which must have been about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, a long time ago, 10 years ago. I have been contemplating what he meant by that. And I think if anybody was in a position to know, it was this guy. This guy was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, his comb produces ring cell to this day. It's totally insane. Not like an ordinary Lama you have to believe in. It's like very obvious. And if he didn't think it was sufficient and said it was not his experience, that simply recognizing was enough, I think that's enough for me. So I'm going based on that. And I also found that whenever I visited any of my lamas, what are they actually doing? If you peek in on them when they're just in their room, they're saying mantras continuously, continuously. They say, I mean, I would imagine most great lamas, they say hundreds of millions of mantras in their lifetimes. And these numbers are well represented. If you read Tulku Urgyen's memoirs, Blazing Splendor, he says, oh yeah, the king of Dorje at this time was said to have recited the Vajrayana mantra 100 million times. Why would they do that if they didn't need to? It takes a lot of time, and it's you've got to be heavily engaged, because maybe it's true what Chöying Dorje said, and that the blessings of the lineage, the blessings of the Buddhas need a place to land, and landing in our impure mind, as you very generously and I think untruly described, even if you catch a glimpse, how long does it last? The actual authentic view. And to bring that into your daily life of our paying bills and raising kids and working and driving around and entertaining ourselves and eating and shopping and filling the car with gas, my God, how little is the time when you're in pristine awareness? People might fool themselves or might tell themselves, maybe not fooling, that they're in it all the time. I think this is complete bullshit, but I'm cool with other people believing whatever they want, right? I'm a member of the Whatever Works Wellness Association. If it works for you to just only practice Trekcho, okay, I'm cool with that. But my teachers don't do that, didn't do that, and in the future will not be doing that. Garchen Rinpoche is exactly the same. I use Garchen Rinpoche as an example because I encourage everyone to watch his podcasts, not podcasts, his videos that are on his YouTube channel. When he gives something live, to see him, just to see the face of this master purifies more karma than 10 nundros. The guy's amazing, really. He's really, as you know, he's incredible. And what does he say he does? He said, all the time I'm in retreat. I don't see anybody. I come out here, I give teachings, I go back to my room, and what's happening in his room? This is himself talking. He said he plays CDs of reciting mantras all the time. Why would he do that? This is a person who is very clear about what the view is. I don't think he's still trying to figure out what Rigpa means. I'm pretty confident about that. And he spent 20 years in prison, some of those with one of the greatest masters of the time, Khenpo Munsel, a direct disciple of Khenpo Nachung, holder of the lineage that came directly from Longchenpa to Jigme Lingpa. And he received all those teachings. And yet, what is he doing? He's listening to mantras in his room. He's practicing saying mantras himself. What do they do at the Garshan Institute? Continual sadhana practice. He's always giving empowerments. He's not saying it's not necessary to do this. That's just for lesser people than you guys. Just recognize the view and you'll be good. No, it is a progression. Our Sem and Rigpa are mixed together. They need to be separated. It's not enough to do a weekend Rushan retreat, although that might be very beneficial to have a permanent, disengagement from ordinary mind. Your life would be very different. You know what I mean? I remember Zongsar Kensei saying, someone was asking questions about Mahasiddhas from India. And he said, if you saw a Mahasiddha, you would run. I mean, they're much more like, if you've been to India or you've been to Nepal, they're more like sadhus than they are like what we think of as Vajrayana masters with big followings and stuff. They're lunatics. And it just seems to me that we are ordinary people. I shouldn't say we. I should say me. I am an ordinary person. I still wear clothes. When it's cold, I'm cold. When it's hot, I'm sweating. I'm a regular person. If that all ceases and my body doesn't cast a shadow, maybe I can give up saying mantras. But as far as I can tell, no matter how advanced the person gets, they still do that. The 16th Karmapa, who was at the time, according to everyone alive, was the king of the Dharma. What was he actually doing? Saying mantras, right? In fact, his main way of blessing us was to put on his hat. And what is he doing at the same time? Saying Om Mani Padme Hum. So that is the voice of the deity, right? And if we want our voice to be the voice of the deity, we got to say mantras. We can't say, I'll have a double scoop of pistachio gelato. That's not what the deity says. Do you understand what I mean? So to balance that, we have to practice the Yidam. Plus, it's fun, and it brings other types of accomplishment that are not only a pristine, pure mind. It has other benefits. It purifies the body, it purifies the speech, it purifies the mind, it turns you into a bodhisattva, it blesses you, and it has other kinds of things that happen that are more subtle. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it seems that even the word Buddha in Tibetan means to accumulate and purify, right? Like completely finished, right? All the things. So we have there's a process to happen here, because in some ways you could look at, like, if you have this moment of pristine awareness, it's almost outside of time, experience, the body, karma, but then you come right back, and you're right back in your body and you have all the same problems that you had before. That are not conducive to being in that state. So really, we need to make this more conducive to that. So it's not wrong, right? Like, in some ways, yes, we are trying to be in Trekcha all the time. But the problem is we are nowhere near being able to do that. So what do we need to do to make that possible? And that's the path, right? To clean up the channels, to clean up the karma, to clean up your life, to make things, maybe even produce some more wealth so that you don't have to think about money, and produce all the things you need to not worry about this plane, so that we can spend more time in the view. And that the mantra, and then as you've talked about before, and most people know, that Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche combined these two things, Maha and Ati, right? So he was abiding in the view and doing the deity practice at the same time. So there's obviously a reason for that, and not the least of which being that the mantra helps stabilize our mind, right? It protects the mind so that we can sustain that view for longer periods of time. Because I don't know, maybe there are people who are just exceptional Treksha practitioners, but for me, trying to hold it for any length of time is ridiculously hard. It's just like everything is distracting, and you just fall right out of it, right? So there's some other processes that need to happen, and it's the traditional presentation, in my point of view, of the accumulation and purification of merit. That's an inescapable necessity if we want to actualize what Dzogchen's talking about.
I mean, I agree. And I know this might fly in the face of the way people have received teachings in recent years. And you think of like the greatest non-dharmic presenter of Dzogchen in the West right now is probably Sam Harris. I mean, he's like a guy who was a student of Tulku Urgyen, extremely smart guy, and a lot of interesting things to say, and obviously received these teachings from Tulku Urgyen and puts them into practice in his life. But I don't think Sam's a siddha. So I don't know him. Maybe he is a siddha, but I think that for us, it's similar to, I have a wind bell in the backyard, and we had a big wind storm. It's hung up very high on the electrical wire, and it got blown down. I had to put it back up there. I got the ladder. The ladder has many steps, and I needed to use those steps. I couldn't just jump from the ground onto the top of the ladder so I could reach the wire to put the bell up. I needed to take those steps. So probably it's like that, right? We need support. And the basic support is reflecting on the four mind changings, and then the Nundro, and then what? Yidam practice. And Yidam practice is the Vajrayana. That's the very essence of the Vajrayana. And to throw that out because you think you have something better, I think it's dangerous. I mean, hey, again, whatever works. And I'm happy to have everyone do whatever they think is best. But it's been my experience, and it seems to be the teaching and also my experience of viewing many lamas in their own environments, in their homes in Tibet. What do they actually do? They freaking say mantras continuously. Go ahead.
No,
I think that it has to do with the fact, this is just my take on it, but to live in the West in the way that we do, we have freaking everything. My Tibetan teachers do not have an indoor toilet. They go to the bathroom outside in the middle of winter when it's like 25 degrees below zero. These guys are like tough, right? I have in my house, my little house, I have two toilets. I mean, this is like a tiny little house, right? I can also, if I'm cold, I can just push a button and all of a sudden it becomes warm. If it's dark, I can just push a button and it becomes light. Incredible. This takes tremendous merit to have a life like this. I have a car that works. I have a family that loves me. I have friends. I can go out and eat Indian food or Japanese food or whatever. All this stuff takes tremendous merit, which is being used to support my lifestyle. I really think it's important for us to hear. We are not, for the most part, everybody in the West who's listening to this podcast has a phone or they have a computer. I mean, that means, wow, think about what you own. Incredible. That takes a lot of merit, and that merit is being used to support this lifestyle. We need to replenish that. And it's not enough to just be like, I dedicate the merit to that isn't enough. We need to be continuously working to support our the foundation of our practice. And it seems like by doing Yidam practice, we accumulate so much merit, which then, of course, we dedicate to all beings. And we keep that energy flowing. Like you said, there are specific practices for all different types of things. If you're sick, if someone you know is sick, if you need to bless some land so that it will flourish, if you need to gain wealth or you need to magnetize a partner, there are many practices for these things. And they all work together. It's one system. It's not just, oh, we don't need that system because we got this one thing, just Trekcho and Togyal, or just Trekcho, actually, which is how they do it, since they don't even teach Togyal too much anymore. It seems like, I don't want to say disrespectful, but kind of like missing out a little bit. You know what I mean? Missing out on this incredible power that abides within the Vajrayana. Why not use it? It's also easier to recognize the view when you're a Yidam, because the mind of the Yidam is the view. If I'm just an ordinary person, in this case, an ordinary Joe, then I can also try to recognize the view, but it's an ordinary person. And as Lama Norsok says, not so easy for the blessings to land. But if you're a Yidam, if you're visualizing yourself as Tara or whatever, then much easier because Tara is already blessed. Every aspect of her form is blessedness itself. And when you imagine yourself that way, those qualities come into you and you become more beneficial to beings. You become softer. You become more beneficial in the sense of being more full of love and so forth. And all it takes is Om Tare Tu Tare Turi Soha, right? It's not like it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So like in a lot of ways, it's giving us something to do, right? Because continuously we are, as you said, burning up our good karma and creating new bad karma all the time, just like a river. So, and yeah, maybe if we were sitting in a cave, living on Chulen, then just sitting in Trekcho would be cool, like great. But because we are engaged in so much karma all the time, we have to work with that. We can't ignore the fact that we are accumulating tons of negative karma and using up our positive karma. So like, yes, if we had the opportunity to disconnect ourselves from those karmic prices, then maybe we could really just focus on the view. But since we are engaged all the time, then we need to counteract that to some degree through the accumulation of merit and the purification of obscurations.
I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Not only to support our luxurious lifestyles, but just to have the wherewithal and the circumstances to keep practicing, right? I mean, it's easy for things to go south, and then all of a sudden, you don't have any time. Dharma is a luxury practice for almost all of us. You have to have all your other ducks in a row. So you're automatically, you need a place to live, you need something to eat, you need to be warm enough, you need to have the right kind of clothes. You have to have that, or else you can't practice at all, because then you're immediately starving to death. And the last thing you're doing is resting in the view when you're busy starving, unless you're some kind of siddha. And then this doesn't apply to those people. They got their own deal. It occurred to me also that I don't remember who told me this story, but maybe Eric Pema Kunsang, who was with Tulku Urgyen for a long time, somebody like that. was present when some people came with this exact question to Tulku Urgyen. Who is Mr. View, right? I mean, Sakya Trizin sent his students to Tulku Urgyen for the mind introduction. Trangu Rinpoche would send his students to Tulku Urgyen. He was famous for that. So you'd think that if anybody is going to be doing that, uh, it's Tulku Urgyen doing that here, meaning not doing anything except sitting in the view.
Yeah.
Someone came to visit Tulku Urgyen, and of course Tulku Urgyen was saying mantras because he always did on his plastic mala that he got from the Karmapa, and which is kind of funny in itself. But anyway, he was sitting there doing that, and the person was like, "Why are you doing that? Why are you saying mantras? You're a Dzogchen master, and you always teach Dzogchen. Shouldn't you just be practicing Dzogchen?" And he said, "Well, my mouth isn't busy." I thought that was a very interesting answer.
Yeah.
It reminds me also of Lama Drime, who's the Dzogchen inheritor of Chagdud Rinpoche's lineage, and who I have a lot of respect for. He gave a teaching once that I heard, and he said something like, "You should always be practicing. Try to always be doing something. You're filling up your car with gas, say mantras. You're driving somewhere, make aspiration prayers. Don't let yourself just drift." And it's very easy for the space-like awareness present in the view to turn into the spaced outness of being an ordinary person, right? It's very, very easy. So I encourage our listeners, and I tell myself not to be more on the careful side. It's much, much better. And as if Tulku Urgyen can say mantras and recognize the view, then hey, we can try to do that too. We don't have to give up our mantras to practice in some other way. There's a time for abandoning the ninefold activities and sitting without doing anything. Of course, absolutely. And when we reach that place, we should do that. But that's built on a big foundation that supports that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we look at the Karmapa, you look at the Dalai Lama, you look at Garchen Rinpoche, you look at Togo Origin. I mean, do we need any more examples? And one thing it reminds me of is this story. He's not a Buddhist, but Ram Dass had a story where he kind of was the be here now guy, and very much had the similar kind of idea that there was nothing to achieve or accomplish. But then he had this massive stroke. And he said that he didn't even think the word God. He didn't have any connection to spiritual practice at all. He just was terrified of dying. And he said after that, he's like, I have some work to do. And so he got serious about mantra and more of the japa practice and stuff in his tradition, because he saw that that didn't actually amount to something in that moment when you need it most. And that always kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I am an advocate and a practitioner of practical Dharma. Practical Dharma means your life gets better because you practice. If you get more angry and more depressed because you practice, then something's wrong, right? I find that the Yidam makes me extremely glad to be alive, and I'm grateful that I get to supplicate Tara and Chanda Maharoshana, and all these different practices are very fun to do, and they do have real undeniable effects on your life, most of which are extremely good. So why would we not want to? As Tulku Urgyen said, my mouth is not busy, right? Your mind looks into the view. That is the practice of the Yidam, right? Your mind is the mind of the deity. Your speech is the speech of the deity, and your form is the form of the deity. This is not separate from Dzogchen. Of course, there are Dzogchen practices where you're not doing visualizations. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about our daily way of engaging with the path.
Well, I want to say thank you, Joe, for going over this. I think it's such an important topic, and there's a lot of confusion around how to practice and put these things together. And sometimes the lamas don't even make it clear all the time how to look at this in a big holistic way, right? Because you often go to a teaching about a specific practice, and that's what the lama teaches. And so sometimes people don't know, well, how does this teaching or practice fit into the context of a whole Dharma life? And I think that's really what we're talking about here. And as you said, and we said many times, that all these great masters had a whole Dharma life. They were doing Kora, they were doing prostrations, they did Nundro, they make offerings, and all of them, Chacha Rinpoche, all of them were doing like constant activity, even though they were also spending a lot of time in meditation and obviously understood Dzogchen and all of these things. So I think that it's helpful and important for people to recognize, especially us busy Westerners, that we need to transform, as you said, our daily life and activities into Dharma to the best of our ability, and doing practice all the time, because it's just there's so much momentum in samsara, and we have to like counter that momentum a little bit. But I want to thank you for talking about this, and thank you all of you for listening to this show, and supporting us by just clicking that like button, the subscribe button, leaving a comment, saying what your thoughts are about this. Those things help us for the algorithm, so more people can reach this podcast and it can benefit others. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.